If you're a music producer, this is the last music theory tutorial you will ever need. We're going to cover the basics of music theory and everything you need to create really good chords and melodies. Let's get started. This is a note. This is a melody. Or in other words, a series of single notes played in succession to create a phrase that conveys emotion, tells a story, or forms the backbone of a song. Here's a chord. Or three or more notes played at one time. Now here's a progression of chords. Now here's our chord progression playing simultaneously with our melody. And together, they create harmony. Harmony is when more than one line of music, in this case, our first line of music is our melody, our second line is our chords, play together simultaneously. So how do we get here? Or in other words, how do we have a melody with a bunch of notes that work together with these chords to form a harmony? Let's break down what's going on here so we have a better idea. Music theory is broken down into these pitches we call notes. On our keyboard, we have all these white notes. These are the natural notes, and they are labeled from A through G. And then they repeat from A through G again until the end of the keyboard. From A to A is called an octave, and that's the same for every other note. So from E to E is also an octave. Octaves go down as well, so from A to A is also an octave. On our keyboard, we also see this repeating pattern of black notes. These notes represent the white keys. So for example, if we take this black note that's right above the C, that's called C sharp. However, each black note has two names. This black note also touches this B, so it is a B flat. Here's another example. We have this black note here. It's up from the G, so it is a G sharp, and it's down from the A, which makes it an A flat as well. Now that we covered pitches and notes, we have to understand two types of movements throughout the keyboard. One is whole step movements, the other is half step movements. For example, let's look at this C note here. One whole step from this C goes right here. Or in other words, a whole step is always going to be two keyboard notes away. A half step is always going to be one keyboard note away. Here's a quiz for you. If we take a D note, let's place a note 5 half steps away. Try to pause this video and guess. 5 half steps away would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right here. Another way to look at this distance is that it's one whole step, 2 whole steps, and a half. So 2.5 whole steps. Now that we understand steps, let's talk about scales. Scales help you strategically put notes together to form a desired emotion. And a scale is just a group of notes that sound good together. Now there are two main scales that you're going to have to know, and that's the minor scale and the major scale. Let's first make the minor scale. We'll start on any note, and then we add a whole step, a half step, whole, whole, half, whole, whole. Now we have the minor scale. That alone sounds like a melody. Now let's make the major scale, which is the other popular scale. Now for this scale, you start on any note, then you add a whole step, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Now the words major and minor come from the quality that is generated from the notes within that scale. For example, the major scale generates a more positive or brighter tone, and we can hear that just by flaring the scale like this. And now here's the minor scale, which generates a more serious tone. Hear that? Isn't that kind of cool? Now keep in mind, when you know the formula to build a certain scale, you can build that scale on any key. For example, this black note here is called an F sharp. If I wanted to build the minor scale within the key of F sharp, we would start there and build out our scale. We start on the F sharp and we go whole, half, whole, whole, half, whole, whole. And now we have the minor scale based on the F sharp, or in other words, the F sharp minor scale. Now that's how to write a scale. But how do you use a scale? You use a scale by first picking a scale that will help guide you toward a specific emotion, and then you limit yourself to only using the notes within that scale. So for example, if I want to write a melody for my horror movie score, something dark, I'll need to pick a scale that'll help guide me toward that emotion. Remember we said the minor scale carries a darker mood. And now to make a melody within this scale, we can use any of these notes, but we can't place any melody notes on these blank spaces. Otherwise, that's called stepping out of key. Stepping out of key does not sound natural. Let's make our melody. Let's add a little bit of reverb to it, because we are producers after all. That's pretty creepy. But hold on a second. You remember earlier we discussed the concept of octaves? Just because we wrote our scale here doesn't mean we're stuck to these 7 notes. We can add some salt and pepper to our melody by using different octaves to add more notes. We'll add a couple notes up here. And then if you want to get a really creepy effect, you scroll down to a really low octave and put one of them. Now the world of scales is pretty expansive. There's the popular scales like the major and minor scale in Western music, but there's also the blues scale, the pentatonic major scale. There's even these 7 weird things called modes, one of which is called the Locrian mode, which is known for its uncanny, unstable character. And my favorite scale, which is the harmonic minor scale. And every scale or mode is designed to help you aim toward a specific emotion, story, or mood for your music. So when you're studying, make sure to practice and learn the sound of each scale so you can really figure out which scale will help you develop your own unique sound. Now with that being said, let's go ahead and shift our focus onto chords. Scales help guide us toward a broad emotional direction, but chords help refine that emotion into something more specific. Now to build a chord, you can pick any note. To make it easy, we'll start on this A. We're going to make this A the bottom note of our chord, which is a great place to start when you're practicing. The bottom note of the chord is called the root note. The second note you add is a fifth. The fifth is always going to be 7 half steps up from the root. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The third note your chord gets is either the minor third, which is 3 half steps up from the root, or the major third. Major chords have a brighter tone to them than their chord sibling, which are minor chords. Do you hear the difference? Now these chords are called triads because they have 3 notes, and the way you name a triad is based on the root note and the position of that third. So here our root note is A, so we have an A major chord. Here our root note is also A, but we have that minor third, so we have an A minor chord. Now technically, if we get rid of these fifths, we still have a major third right here and a minor third right here, and these are called intervals. Intervals are 2 notes played at once, and then when you add that third note, they become that major triad or that minor triad. Now that you know how to make a chord, you have to know how chords relate to scales, as this will give you what you need to write chord progressions, and that's where the fun stuff starts. Now, how do chords relate to scales? By the way, I'm switching to Logic. Here's the A minor scale again, just to make things easy. And in any given minor or major scale, you have not only 7 notes, but you also have 7 chords. 1 chord for each note, 1 note for each degree of the scale. In every scale, each degree of the scale is numbered from 1 through 7. So the chord on the first degree of that scale, you could also call the 1 chord in that scale. That's the same for the second, third, and so on and so forth. With that being said, another way to make chords is just to count the degrees of the scales instead of doing all this whole step and half step stuff. For example, if you're in the A minor scale and you want to make the 1 chord, which in other words is the tonic, the first chord of the scale, and then add your next note 3 degrees up the scale, and then you add your 5th, which is 5 degrees up the scale. And there's our triad. Now, the other cool thing about using degrees to build your chords is that you can go a little farther into the chord system. For example, this is a triad because it has 3 notes. But you could also add a 7th degree to your triads to make a 7th chord. In other words, you could take any chord in your scale, add the 3rd 3 degrees up, go 5 degrees up from the root, and add the 5th, and then we can add the 7th. And that's how we would build our 7th chords wherever we want in the scale. Now, 7th chords give off a different energy than just basic triads. They used to be more common in genres like jazz and blues. But now producers are using these chords in any genre to add that very jazzy and bluesy flavor to anything now. Check this out. Here's a little dance beat I made with basic triads. I'm going to play it back, then I'm going to add the 7ths to each chord, and we'll see if you could hear the difference. Here's the triad version. Now we'll take each of these chords, and we'll add the 7th degree to each chord. Now that you understand notes, scales, steps, and chords, it's time we talk about chord progressions. Chord progressions are the emotional backbone of any song. Now, in order to make chord progressions, you have to understand 2 things. The first thing is musical time, like how music moves. The second thing, which is a little harder, and that is how to string chords together in order to create the desired emotion that you're going for. Let's first discuss musical time. Most Western music is written in a time signature called 4/4. This is the most common time signature in songwriting, and understanding 4/4 is essential for writing chord progressions. The way to understand 4/4 is to look inside your software of choice. I'm in Logic, and you'll notice these numbers across the arrangement grid. These numbers are bars or measures, you can call them. And you'll notice there's 4 lines before every bar counts up a number. Those lines are beats. So 4/4 means 4 beats per bar. Play it with the metronome on so you could hear it. If I increase the tempo, our musical time will go faster, but we will still be in 4/4. And that louder beat, which happens on these thicker grid lines, are called downbeats. This is when that 4th beat resets and it starts over again. Now, because of this 4/4 time signature, most chord progressions that you make or hear will be 4 bars long or some multiple of 4. Another common length for chord progressions is an 8-bar progression like this. Notice it moves a little slower. 8-bar progressions are still common in most music, although slightly less common than the 4-bar progression. Now let's talk about the most important part of chord progressions, which is writing chord progressions that actually sound good and that generate the right emotion for the song you're trying to create. So to make a chord progression, pick any scale. I'm going to use the A minor scale. Remember that there are 7 chords that we can choose from in the A minor scale, and we can use any octave. Our starting point is to make a progression with 4 chords, that is 4 4 bars long. You can obviously make your chords however long you want, but this is a good starting point. Here's the first progression that I came up with. It is the 1, 7, 4, and 6 in the A minor scale. Now when you're practicing and randomly piecing together different chord combinations, you want to listen for the emotion that that chord progression is giving off. Because as you get better at this, you will start to remember which chord combinations generate certain emotions. Here's a couple examples of go-to progressions that I like to use to generate certain emotions. For this first one, it's the 5, 6, 1, and 7 in the minor scale. This gives me a very uplifting vibe, and it's good for dancey, kind of cheesy EDM music. Here's an 8-bar progression I like to use in deep house songs because of its deep vibe. It's the 1, 3, 5, 4 in the minor scale. Here's a 7, 1, 4, 5, 6 in the A minor scale. This is the chord progression that Fred again used in Adore You. This is a fun group of chords to play around with in dance music. Here's one of the most popular chord progressions in all of music. It's the 6, 7, 1, 3 in the minor scale. And this is how it was used in Kygo's Firestone. It's very uplifting, happy progression. Now I can show you all day different chord progressions that I use to generate different emotions when I'm writing songs. However, there are still different things that you could do to your chord progressions to make them sound interesting as well. For example, downward moving progressions tend to give off more of a serious or sad tone. Upward progressions or upward movements will tend to give off a more uplifting or positive tone. Another thing with progressions is that you can move the notes and the chords around to get a smoother, more satisfying sound. When your chords are constructed from the root to the third to the fifth, that is called root form, or in other words, their most basic form. When all your chords are in the most basic form, you might get a pretty basic sound at times. So what you can do is you can select some notes in the chords. For the example, we'll take the third. You can spread out the third. This is called open voicing. Here's the chords without open voicing. Same chords, slightly different sound. Another thing you can do is double the notes in the chord that you think are more important or helping the song the most. So what I like to do is take the bass notes of my chords and double them and see if that'll work. And I'll also maybe double a high note. That's my chords with a doubled root and a doubled third. There's also these things called inversions, and that's when you can either take the third or the fifth or both and put it an octave down to give your progression a more tucked in linear feel. A lot of times these inversions sound smoother and easier on the ears. That's a pretty unique sound. Oh yeah, one more thing, don't forget. Rearticulate your chords at times to either add energy to them for a different part of the song or make them more suitable for the genre you're working in. I like to make house music, so I might do this a lot. I love these chords. Why didn't I I ever used these chords before? For this final section of the video, I want to talk about melodies. Melodies are the most creative part of music theory because there are infinite possibilities for how you can write melodies. The reason for this is that every other part of music theory, whether it's chords, scales, and every other thing we touched on in this video, all those things have frameworks. Like, for example, to make a chord, you have a root, a third, and a fifth. To make a minor scale, there's a formula you follow to make that scale. To make a major scale, there's a formula you follow to make that scale. Melodies are a little different because they are less defined, which makes it a little bit more tricky, but it also gives you infinite possibilities to really express yourself as a musical artist. To write good melodies, I think you have to understand one thing, and that is scale relativity. So let's start here. Every minor scale shares the same notes with a relative major scale. For example, here are all of the notes in the A minor scale. Notice that all of the notes in the A minor scale are the white keys. If we write out the C major scale, again, it's all the white keys. This is because A minor and C major are relative scales. To find the relative major scale of your minor scale that you're in, you would go to the third degree of that scale, and that is your relative major. If you're in a major scale and you want to find the relative minor, you would go to the sixth degree of that scale, and that would be your relative minor. So how do we take that information and apply it to building a melody? Well, with melodies, you can technically start anywhere you want and just go and see where the music takes you. But I think that idea makes it tricky, especially if you're a beginner. Because again, you don't have that starting point, so you're kind of just throwing darts at a dartboard hoping something will stick. And when you get good, you're going to do that a lot. It'll work for you. But when you're just starting out, you can use music theory to help give you a starting point for writing your melodies. So step one is you want to start with the set of chords. It gives you some kind of emotional foundation to build on. I'm going to use the F major, G major, A minor, back to G major. They sound like this. Now, this is a good neutral chord progression in the scale of A minor, C major. It has a mix of minor and major chords, so we can use our melody to either enhance its major side or enhance its minor side. So with a melody, technically you can start on whichever note you want, but here's what I recommend. Go to the tonic of the scale that you are in or the relative tonic. So we're in A minor. I'm just going to put a note on A. And step one, I always do this, I write a repetitive note on the tonic, and then I play it back to help calibrate my emotions and get myself in a musical mood. So we kind of get like a serious vibe. All right, so now I'm going to build my melody based on this tonic note. Every melody focuses on one singular note. No matter how many notes is included in that melody is always focused on a singular note. Usually it's the tonic of the key signature that your song is in. So I'm just going to move these notes around. I'm going to keep the first note on that tonic, and then we'll get this. Isn't that cool? You kind of get like that emphasized, serious vibe drilled into your head. Now watch this. Remember I said every melody is going to have its focus note. In this case, it's that tonic that we started the melody on. If I take this melody now, I take this tonic, and I put it on the relative major, which is the C. It's going to emphasize the major side of these chords. But I also have to rewrite this melody in the major scale. And then we get this. See how it's like more uplifting, happy, positive? That is a big difference from the minor rooted melody. But that's how I relate theory to writing melodies. Melodies are going to be a little bit trickier because they are less defined than everything else. But if you use that as a starting point, like rooting your melody on a certain tonic, I think you'll pick it up pretty quickly. That is a video for you. Thanks so much for watching. For more resources like coaching programs, courses, and sound packs, visit my website at the top of the description below, and stay tuned for the next video.